The woman's body hit the dirt beside his water trough like a sack of grain dropped from a horse, and Ryder Finch knew before he even reached her that she was more dead than alive. He had been mending a fence post when he heard the sound, that awful thud that echoed across his property in the late afternoon heat of August, 1878. His ranch sat 3 miles outside Wallace, Idaho, in a valley where the sun baked everything to golden dust, and the nearest neighbor was a half-day's ride. Ryder dropped his tools and ran, his boots kicking up clouds as he crossed the yard. The woman lay crumpled on her side, her dress torn and filthy, her dark hair matted with blood and dirt. Her lips were cracked and bleeding, her face sunburned so badly that the skin had started to peel. He could see her ribs through the ripped fabric of her bodice, each breath a shallow, rattling thing that barely moved her chest. "Madam," Ryder knelt beside her, his hand hovering over her shoulder. "Can you hear me?" No response. He pressed 2 fingers to her throat and felt the faintest flutter of a pulse, weak and irregular. Her skin burned with fever despite the dehydration that had clearly ravaged her body. Ryder did not hesitate. He slid his arms beneath her and lifted, shocked by how little she weighed. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, he guessed, though it was hard to tell with her face so damaged by sun and suffering. Her head lolled against his chest as he carried her toward the house, and he felt the heat radiating from her like she was burning from the inside out. The interior of his cabin was sparse but clean. A single large room with a stone fireplace, a table, 2 chairs, and a bed in the corner. Ryder laid her on the bed as gently as he could, then rushed to pump water from the well into his largest pot. He set it on the stove to warm, not too hot, just enough to take the chill off. While it heated, he soaked a cloth in cool water and began dabbing at her face, washing away the layers of grime. Her features emerged slowly: high cheekbones, a straight nose, full lips despite their damaged state. She would be beautiful when she healed, if she healed. Ryder worked through the night. He got water into her drop by drop, tilting her head and letting it trickle between her lips, watching to make sure she swallowed. Most of it ran down her chin at first, but gradually her body remembered what to do. He cleaned her wounds, a gash on her temple, scrapes on her hands and arms, blisters on her feet so severe that he knew she had walked for miles without proper shoes. Her boots lay somewhere out in the desert, probably, lost or stolen. He found a relatively clean nightshirt of his own and managed to get her out of the ruined dress and into it, trying to preserve what modesty he could, though she was unconscious throughout. The fever raged. Ryder kept cool cloths on her forehead, changing them every few minutes when they grew warm. He made a thin broth from salted beef and got small amounts down her throat. He checked her pulse every hour, counting the beats against his pocket watch. Too fast, always too fast, her heart racing as her body fought whatever infection had taken hold. Dawn came and went. Ryder did not sleep. He sat beside the bed, his chair pulled close, his hand sometimes resting on her wrist to feel that thready pulse. He talked to her, nonsense mostly, his voice low and steady. He told her about the ranch, about the 30 head of cattle he was trying to build into a real herd, about the horse he had bought last spring who could cut better than any animal he had ever seen. He told her she was going to be fine, that she just needed to keep breathing, keep fighting, that she was safe now. The second night was worse. Her fever spiked so high that Ryder stripped the blankets off and sponged her entire body with cool water, soaking the nightshirt through. She thrashed and mumbled, caught in nightmares he could not wake her from. He heard fragments of words, please and no, and once, clearly, leave me alone. Whatever she had been running from haunted her still. Ryder brewed willow bark tea, something his mother had taught him before she died, and coaxed it into the woman's mouth a spoonful at a time. He did not know if it would help, but he had to try something. His eyes burned with exhaustion, and his hands shook from too much coffee and too little rest, but he could not bring himself to leave her side. Every time he thought about lying down, even for an hour, he imagined her pulse finally giving out while he slept, imagined finding her cold and still when he woke. So he stayed. On the third day, her fever broke. Ryder had been changing the cloth on her forehead when he noticed her skin felt cooler. He pressed his palm to her cheek, then her throat, hardly daring to believe it. The flush had faded from her face, leaving her pale but no longer burning. Her breathing had deepened, become more regular. He checked her pulse and found it stronger, steadier than it had been since he had found her. Relief hit him so hard that he had to sit down. He slumped in the chair, his head in his hands, and felt the tension drain from his body all at once. She would live. He did not know who she was, or where she had come from, or what had happened to her, but she would live. Ryder finally allowed himself to sleep, his head pillowed on his arms at the edge of the bed. He woke a few hours later to the sound of movement. His head jerked up, his hand instinctively reaching for the revolver on his hip before he remembered where he was. The woman's eyes were open. They were green, he saw, a deep forest green that stood out sharply against her pale face. She stared at the ceiling, her expression blank, her body very still. Ryder shifted in his chair and her gaze snapped to him, something wild and panicked flaring in those eyes. "Easy," he said, keeping his voice soft. "You are safe. You are at my ranch outside Wallace. I found you by my water trough 3 days ago. You were in bad shape." She did not speak. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in the walls, the fireplace, the door, calculating distances maybe, or looking for threats. Her right hand crept to her throat, touching the collar of the nightshirt she wore. "I had to change your clothes," Ryder said, feeling heat rise in his face. "Your dress was ruined. I tried to be respectful. Still nothing." She just stared at him with those wide, wary eyes. "My name is Ryder Finch," he continued. "This is my land. You are welcome to stay as long as you need to recover. No one is going to hurt you here." The woman's lips parted, and she tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. Ryder quickly poured water into a tin cup and held it out to her. She struggled to sit up, wincing with every movement, her body weak and uncoordinated. He slid an arm behind her shoulders to support her, and she flinched but did not pull away. She took the cup with trembling hands and drank, small sips at first, then deeper gulps. "Slow," Ryder warned. "You will make yourself sick." She lowered the cup and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw and painful to hear. "What is your name?" She hesitated, her eyes dropping to the quilt that covered her lap. "Flora," she said finally. "Flora Turner." "Miss Turner, can you tell me what happened to you? How you ended up in the desert alone?" Flora's hands tightened on the cup until her knuckles went white. "I was traveling," she said. "The stagecoach was attacked. There were 3 men, outlaws. They killed the driver and the other passengers. I ran." Ryder felt cold settle in his gut. "When did this happen?" "I do not know. Days ago I walked. I just kept walking." Her voice cracked. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You almost did." Ryder took the cup from her shaking hands and set it on the table beside the bed. "You were burning up with fever. Your feet are a mess. You are lucky you made it to my place when you did." "Lucky," Flora repeated, and something bitter twisted her mouth. She looked down at her hands, at the bandages wrapped around her palms where the worst blisters had been. "I do not feel very lucky. You are alive. That is more than the others can say, I would wager." She flinched as if he had struck her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I suppose that is true." Ryder immediately regretted his bluntness. "I am sorry, that was thoughtless." "You have been through hell, Miss Turner. You should rest. I will make you something to eat, something light. Your stomach will not handle much yet." Flora nodded, her eyes already drifting closed again. The brief conversation had exhausted her. Ryder stood and moved to the stove, grateful for something to do with his hands. He heated more broth and cut thin slices of bread, aware of her watching him through half-closed eyes as he worked. Over the next several days, Flora's strength returned slowly. Ryder helped her to sit up, then to stand, then to walk a few steps to the chair by the table. Her feet pained her terribly, and she could only wear the soft moccasins he had fashioned from scraps of leather, nothing with a hard sole. She said little, answering his questions with brief words, never offering information on her own. He learned that she was 22, that she had been traveling from her family's farm in Wyoming to meet relatives in Oregon, that she had saved for 2 years to afford the stagecoach fare. He learned that she had no siblings, that her parents were both dead, that those relatives in Oregon were the only family she had left. What he did not learn was why she sometimes woke in the night screaming, or why she would not let him ride into Wallace to report the attack and get the law involved. When he suggested it, she had grabbed his arm with surprising strength and begged him not to, her eyes wide with fear that seemed excessive even given what she had been through. He wanted to push, to demand answers, but something in her face stopped him. She was healing in body, but her mind and spirit were still fractured, still raw. Ryder found himself watching her more than he should. The way she moved around the cabin as she grew stronger, the way sunlight from the window caught in her dark hair, the way her face softened when she thought he was not looking. She was beautiful, more beautiful than any woman he had ever known, but it was more than that. There was something in her, some core of strength that had kept her walking through the desert when most people would have laid down to die. He admired that. He admired her. Flora seemed to sense his attention. Sometimes he would catch her looking at him too, her green eyes studying his face as if trying to solve a puzzle. She began to help with small tasks around the cabin despite his protests, washing dishes, sweeping the floor, mending a tear in one of his shirts with neat, precise stitches. She was still too weak for anything strenuous, but the activity seemed to help her, gave her something to focus on besides whatever memories haunted her. One evening, about 10 days after he had found her, they sat together at the table eating supper. Ryder had shot a rabbit that morning and made a stew, thick with wild onions and the last of the potatoes from his stores. Flora ate slowly, savoring each bite, and he found himself pleased by her appetite. "This is good," she said, glancing up at him. "You are a better cook than most men I have known." "I have had to be. Living alone does not leave many options. Learn to cook or starve. How long have you been alone?" The question was soft, tentative, the first personal thing she had asked him. 5 years. "I saved my wages working cattle drives and bought this land when I was 23. Been building it up since then, slowly. It is not much yet, but it is mine. That must be satisfying, owning something that is truly yours." There was something wistful in her tone that made him look at her more closely. "Have you never had that? Something of your own?" Flora shook her head. "I lived with my parents until they died, then with neighbors who took me in out of charity. Everything I owned fit in one small trunk. Even that is gone now, lost with the stage." She set down her spoon, her appetite apparently fading. "I have nothing. I am nothing, just a burden on your kindness. You are not a burden." The words came out more forcefully than he intended. "You are a guest, and you are welcome here for as long as you need." She looked at him, really looked at him, and he saw something shift in her expression. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not know me. I could be anyone. I could be dangerous." Are you dangerous, Miss Turner? A ghost of a smile touched her lips. No, not even a little bit. Then there is your answer. And you can call me Ryder if you like. Miss Turner and Mr. Finch seems too formal for people who have been sharing a cabin for 10 days. Flora, she said. Just Flora. Something changed between them after that night. The wariness in Flora's eyes eased, replaced by something warmer. She smiled more, small expressions that transformed her face. She laughed when he told her about the time his horse had dumped him in the creek, and the sound was like music. They fell into a rhythm, working side by side during the day, talking in the evenings, the conversation flowing more easily than Ryder would have thought possible. He taught her to play cards, and she proved to be a quick study, beating him 3 hands out of 5 at poker. She told him stories about growing up on her family's farm, about learning to milk cows and gather eggs, about the summer she was 15 when a bear had gotten into their chicken coop, and she had chased it off with a broom. He told her about his childhood in Missouri, about his father who had been a blacksmith, about the restlessness that had driven him west when he was 18. The days grew shorter as August turned to September. Flora was fully recovered now, her feet healed, her body no longer showing the effects of starvation and exposure. She could have left, could have asked him to take her into Wallace to arrange passage to Oregon. But she did not ask, and he did not offer, and neither of them spoke about the future. Ryder knew he was falling in love with her. He knew it in the way his heart lifted when she smiled, in the way he found excuses to be near her, in the way her presence had transformed his lonely cabin into something that felt like a home. He did not know how to tell her, or if he even should. She had been through so much, had lost so much. The last thing she needed was him pressing his feelings on her when she was still finding her footing, but he thought, he hoped, that maybe she felt something too. He caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was focused on his work, her expressions soft and thoughtful. She found reasons to touch him, her hand on his arm when she passed him something, her shoulder brushing his when they sat together. Small things, maybe meaningless, but they made his pulse quicken all the same. One night in mid-September, a storm rolled in from the mountains, sudden and fierce. Thunder cracked overhead and rain hammered the roof, driven sideways by wind that howled around the corners of the cabin. Ryder got up to check that the door was properly latched and found Flora standing by the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the lightning that lit the sky. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. She shook her head without turning. "I keep thinking about that night, the attack." It was raining then too. The men came out of the storm. We never saw them until it was too late. Ryder moved to stand beside her, close but not touching. "Do you want to talk about it? You have never told me the whole story." Flora was silent for a long moment, the only sounds the rain and the thunder. Then she spoke, her voice barely audible. "There were 4 passengers besides me. A family, a husband and wife and their 2 children and an older man, a merchant. The outlaws stopped the stage, demanded the strong box. The driver tried to argue and they shot him, just like that, no warning. Then they made us all get out." She stopped, her breath catching. Ryder waited, giving her time. "They took everything we had, all our money, our bags. The merchant tried to fight and they shot him too. The father tried to shield his family and they killed him. The mother was screaming, the children were crying, and one of the men, the leader, he looked at me and said I should come with them." Ryder felt fury rise in him, hot and dangerous. "Did they hurt you?" "No, I ran." The mother, she saw me starting to back away and she screamed louder, made a scene, drew their attention. She saved me. And while they were dealing with her, I ran into the storm. I heard more gunshots behind me, but I did not stop. I just ran and ran until I could not hear anything but the wind. Her voice broke. She died so I could escape. That woman and her children, they died and I lived. How is that fair? It is not fair, Ryder said quietly. But it is not your fault either. You cannot blame yourself for surviving. I do, though. Tears streamed down her face now, reflecting the lightning. Every day I do. Ryder could not help himself. He put his arms around her and pulled her close, and after a moment's resistance she collapsed against him, her face pressed to his chest, her body shaking with sobs. He held her and let her cry, one hand stroking her hair, murmuring wordless comfort. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin it was warm, and slowly Flora's tears subsided. She pulled back slightly, tilting her face up to look at him. Her eyes were red but clear, and something in them made his breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for taking care of me, for listening. I do not know what I would have done without you. You do not have to thank me." "Yes, I do." Her hand came up to rest against his cheek, her touch feather light. "You are a good man, Ryder Finch, the best I have ever known." He could feel her breath on his face, could see the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. The space between them seemed charged, electric, more than just the storm. "Flora," he started, not knowing what he wanted to say, only knowing that he needed to say something. She kissed him. Just a soft press of her lips against his, brief and sweet and tentative. When she pulled back, her eyes were wide, almost frightened. "I am sorry," she said quickly. "I should not have." Ryder kissed her back, properly this time, one hand sliding into her hair, the other pulling her close. She made a small sound and melted into him, her arms winding around his neck. The kiss deepened, became something hungry and desperate, weeks of unspoken feelings pouring out between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Ryder pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it is too soon, and I know you have been through hell, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel this. I love you, Flora. I love you too." She was crying again, but smiling at the same time, her face radiant despite the tears. "I think I have loved you since that first morning when I woke up and saw you sleeping in that chair beside the bed. You looked so tired, so worried, and I thought this man, this stranger, he cared whether I lived or died. No one has ever cared like that before." They kissed again and again, until they were both dizzy with it. The storm continued outside, but they barely noticed, lost in each other, in the joy of finally admitting what had been building between them for weeks. Eventually, they returned to their separate beds, propriety still mattering even now, but Ryder lay awake with a smile on his face, listening to Flora's breathing and thinking that he was the luckiest man alive. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm washed away like it had never been. Ryder woke to find Flora already up, making coffee, humming tunelessly under her breath. When she saw him watching, she smiled, that brilliant smile that made his heart stutter, and came to kiss him good morning. It felt natural, felt right, like they had been doing this for years instead of hours. Over breakfast, they talked about the future in a way they had avoided before. Flora told him about her relatives in Oregon, how she had been looking forward to making a new start there, but now was not sure that was what she wanted anymore. Ryder told her about his plans for the ranch, how he hoped to build the herd, maybe get some chickens and a milk cow, eventually build a bigger house. They did not make any concrete decisions, but the implication was there, hanging in the air between them. They would make these choices together. The weeks that followed were the happiest Ryder could remember. He and Flora worked side by side, preparing for winter. They harvested the vegetables from his small garden, put up preserves, chopped wood for the cold months ahead. Flora proved to be a hard worker, uncomplaining even when the tasks were tedious or difficult. She also proved to have a gift with animals. The few chickens Ryder had acquired over the summer had been standoffish with him, but they flocked to Flora, eating from her hand, and within a week, they were producing more eggs than they knew what to do with. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire, Flora often mending clothes or knitting, Ryder working on bits of leather or wood that needed fixing. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations easy and comfortable. Sometimes they read aloud from the few books Ryder owned, and sometimes they just sat in companionable silence, content to be near each other. They kissed often, stolen moments throughout the day when the work allowed, longer sessions in the evening when they could take their time. But they did not go beyond kissing. Ryder wanted her with an intensity that sometimes kept him awake at night, but Flora deserved better than that. She deserved a proper courtship, a proposal, a wedding. She deserved to be respected. In early October, Ryder rode into Wallace for supplies. It was a small town, just a handful of buildings clustered in the valley, but it had a general store and a saloon and a church. He bought flour and salt and sugar, coffee and tobacco, bolts of fabric that he thought Flora might like. He also stopped by the small office that served as the law in these parts and reported the stagecoach attack. The deputy, a young man named Collins who looked barely old enough to shave, listened to the story with wide eyes. "That is the third stage hit in the last 2 months," he said. "The marshal is tracking them, but they keep moving. Can your lady friend identify any of the men?" "I do not know," Ryder admitted. "I have not pressed her on the details, but I will ask." Collins nodded. "We would appreciate it. If she can give descriptions, it might help. These men need to be brought to justice." Ryder agreed and left with his purchases, but his mind was troubled on the ride back. He did not want to put Flora through the pain of reliving that night again, but he also knew that she would want the men who had killed that family brought to justice. It was a conversation they needed to have, but he was not looking forward to it. When he arrived home, Flora came out to help him unload, her face bright with pleasure at seeing him. "I missed you," she said, standing on her toes to kiss his cheek. "The cabin is too quiet without you." "I was only gone a few hours. I know, but still." She saw the fabric and exclaimed over it, holding the cloth up to the light to admire the colors. "This is beautiful. What is it for? You, if you want it. I thought maybe you could make a new dress." "The one you have been wearing is about worn through." Flora looked down at the dress she wore, one of 2 that Ryder had bought for her in town a few weeks back. It was plain and practical, but it fit her well enough. "You are too generous," she said softly. "I do not deserve all this." "You deserve everything I can give you and more." Ryder took her hands, suddenly serious. "Flora, I need to ask you something, and I know it is going to be hard, but it is important." Her smile faded. "What is it?" "I reported the attack to the deputy in Wallace. He said there have been other robberies, that they are looking for these men. He asked if you could identify any of them, give descriptions to help with the search." Flora went very still, her hands cold in his. "I do not want to," she whispered. "I know, but that family, they deserve justice. And those men, they need to be stopped before they hurt anyone else. I know that too." She pulled her hands away, wrapping her arms around herself. "I just do not want to think about it anymore. I want to forget it ever happened." "I understand, but running from it will not make it go away." "Believe me, I know." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Ryder hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. "My father," he said slowly. "He was killed by outlaws when I was 17. They robbed the shop and he fought back and they beat him to death right there in front of me. I did nothing. I just stood there, too scared to move, and I watched him die." Flora's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Ryder. For years I told myself that it was not my fault, that there was nothing I could have done. and maybe that was true, but I also never told the law what the men looked like. I was too scared they would come back for me if I did. So they got away with it, and my father never got justice, and I have had to live with that." He met her eyes. "I do not want that for you, Flora. I do not want you carrying that weight." She was silent for a long time, her gaze distant. Then she nodded just once. "All right," she said. "I will do it, but you have to be with me." Every step of the way, Ryder promised. They rode into Wallace together a few days later. Collins met them at the law office and treated Flora with gentle courtesy, as he asked her to describe what she remembered. She spoke haltingly at first, then with more confidence, detailing the three men. One tall and thin with a scar on his jaw, one stocky with red hair and a thick beard, one young, maybe 20, with dark hair and a nervous way of moving. She described their horses, their saddles, the way they spoke. When she was finished, she looked exhausted but also somehow lighter, as if putting the memories into words had robbed them of some of their power. Collins thanked her profusely and promised to get the information to the marshal. As they were leaving, he called after them. "Miss Turner, I am sorry for what happened to you, and I am glad you found someone to take care of you." Flora glanced at Ryder, and a small smile curved her lips. "I am glad too," she said. On the ride back, Flora was quiet, but she held Ryder's hand, her fingers laced through his. When they reached the cabin, she turned to him and said, "Thank you for making me do that. You were right. I feel better." "Good." He helped her down from the wagon and pulled her into his arms, just holding her, grateful that she was safe, that she was here, that she was his. That night, as they sat by the fire, Ryder found himself thinking about the future with a clarity he had not had before. He wanted Flora to stay, not just for now but forever. He wanted to marry her, to build a life with her, to grow old on this land together. The thought should have terrified him, but instead it filled him with a deep, abiding certainty. He waited until the end of October, when the aspens had turned gold and the air had taken on the sharp bite of coming winter. He had ridden into Wallace again, this time to make a very specific purchase, and he carried the small velvet box in his pocket like a talisman for 3 days before he worked up the nerve to use it. On a Sunday evening, after supper, he took Flora's hand and led her outside. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the mountains stood dark against the horizon. Flora looked at him curiously but followed without question. "Flora Turner," he said, and his voice only shook a little. "I know we have not known each other long. Just over 2 months since I found you at that water trough, more dead than alive. But in that time, you have become the most important thing in my world. You have made me happier than I ever thought I could be. You have turned this house into a home, and you have filled my life with light." Flora's eyes were wide, her hand trembling in his. "Ryder," she whispered. He dropped to one knee, pulling the box from his pocket and opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "I love you more than I have words to express. Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? Will you be my wife?" For a moment that stretched into eternity, Flora just stared at him, her eyes filling with tears. Then she laughed, a sound of pure joy, and dropped to her knees in front of him. "Yes," she said, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Ryder kissed her, joy flooding through him, and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the gold catching the last rays of sunlight. They stayed there on the ground, holding each other, until the stars began to come out, and neither of them had ever been happier. They were married in the little church in Wallace 3 weeks later, on a cold November morning with frost on the ground. There were only a handful of people present. The preacher, Deputy Collins, who had become something of a friend, the storekeeper and his wife, a few ranchers from neighboring properties. Flora wore a dress she had made from the fabric Ryder had bought her, a soft blue that matched the autumn sky, and she carried wildflowers that Ryder had ridden out to gather at dawn. Ryder wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair slicked back, his hands shaking as he took Flora's and spoke his vows. "I, Ryder Finch, take you, Flora Turner, to be my wife. I promise to love you, to honor you, to protect you all the days of my life. You are my heart, my home, my everything." Flora's vows were steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "I, Flora Turner, take you, Ryder Finch, to be my husband. I promise to love you, to stand beside you, to build a life with you. You saved me, not just that day at the water trough, but every day since. You are my miracle, and I will be grateful for you until my last breath." The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Ryder kissed Flora to the cheers of their small audience. They held a modest celebration at the saloon, with food and drink provided by the townspeople, and Ryder had never felt more welcomed, more a part of a community. Flora glowed beside him, her hand never leaving his, her smile radiant. As evening fell, they rode back to their ranch, to their home. Inside, Ryder had built up the fire to chase away the November chill, and the cabin was warm and welcoming. Flora stood in the middle of the room, looking around as if seeing it with new eyes. "This is our home now," she said softly. Really ours, Ryder agreed. He moved to stand behind her, his arms sliding around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Are you happy? Happier than I ever thought possible." She turned in his arms, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Make love to me, husband." Ryder needed no further invitation. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to their bed, the same bed where he had kept vigil over her in those first desperate days. But there was nothing desperate about this. They undressed each other slowly, with reverence, discovering each other by firelight. Ryder had been with women before, brief encounters that had satisfied physical need but left him feeling empty. This was different. This was sacred. Every touch, every kiss, every whispered endearment was a prayer of gratitude for the woman in his arms. Flora was tentative at first, her inexperience obvious, but Ryder was patient, guiding her, showing her what felt good, learning her body as she learned his. When they finally joined, it was with a shared gasp of pleasure and wonder. They moved together slowly, finding a rhythm, their eyes locked, their hands clasped. When release came, it swept over them both like a wave, leaving them breathless and clinging to each other. Afterwards, they lay tangled together, Flora's head on Ryder's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. "I love you," she murmured, already half asleep. "I love you too," Ryder said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Winter came hard that year, snow falling thick and fast, temperatures dropping until the water in the trough froze solid each night. But inside the cabin, Ryder and Flora were warm. They spent the long, dark months working on projects, Ryder carving furniture, Flora sewing quilts and curtains and clothes. They talked and laughed and made love, and the isolation that had once made Ryder feel lonely now felt like a gift, giving them time to be together without distraction. In late December, a rider came to their door, nearly frozen from the journey. Ryder brought him inside and Flora wrapped him in blankets while they made hot coffee. The rider was a deputy marshal, and he had news. The men who had attacked the stagecoach had been caught. They were being held in Boise, awaiting trial, and the marshal wanted to know if Flora would be willing to testify. Flora looked at Ryder, her face pale but resolute. "I will do it," she said. "For that family, for justice." The trial was set for February. Ryder and Flora made the journey to Boise despite the winter weather, traveling by stage themselves, which Ryder knew must have been difficult for Flora, though she did not complain. In Boise, they stayed in a small hotel, and Flora spent 2 days on the witness stand, recounting in detail what she had seen and heard that terrible night. The outlaws stared at her throughout, their faces hard, and Ryder sat in the gallery with his hand on the knife at his belt, ready to defend her if any of them made a move. But they did not, and Flora's testimony was compelling. The jury convicted all 3 men, and they were sentenced to hang. When it was over, Flora cried in Ryder's arms, not from sadness but from relief. "It is finished," she whispered. "It is finally finished." They returned home in early March, just as the snow was beginning to melt. Spring came late to Idaho that year, but when it arrived, it transformed the land. Green grass pushed up through the brown earth, wildflowers bloomed in riotous color, and the creek that ran through Ryder's property swelled with snowmelt. Flora had seemed tired since they returned from Boise, sleeping more than usual, her appetite fluctuating. Ryder worried that the trial had taken more out of her than she would admit, but she insisted she was fine. Then one morning in April, she woke him before dawn, her face glowing. "Ryder," she said, her voice trembling with excitement, "I think I am with child." Ryder sat up so fast he nearly knocked her over. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings, and my body just feels different." She took his hand and pressed it to her still flat stomach. "There is a baby growing inside me, Ryder, our baby." Joy exploded in Ryder's chest, so intense it nearly hurt. He pulled Flora into his arms and held her tight, his face buried in her hair. "We are going to have a baby," he said, testing the words, finding them true. "We are going to be parents." Flora laughed and cried at the same time, and they stayed like that until the sun came up, holding each other, marveling at the miracle they had created. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Flora bloomed, her skin glowing, her body rounding as the baby grew. Ryder was attentive to the point of being overbearing, constantly asking if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if she should be resting. Flora tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she insisted on continuing to do her share of the work around the ranch. In June, they made another trip to Wallace so that the doctor there could examine Flora. He pronounced her and the baby healthy and said he expected the birth to happen in late October or early November. On the way home, Flora was quiet, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "What are you thinking about?" Ryder asked. "About how different my life is now compared to a year ago," she said. "Last June, I was planning my trip to Oregon, trying to figure out how to start over. I was so scared, Ryder. I had no idea what I was going to do or how I was going to survive. And now look at me. I have a husband I adore, a home I love, and a baby on the way. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." "You deserve all of it and more," Ryder said, reaching over to take her hand. "You are the strongest, bravest woman I know, Flora. Our child is lucky to have you as a mother." "And lucky to have you as a father," Flora said, squeezing his fingers. "You are going to be wonderful at it. I know you are." Summer passed in a haze of heat and hard work. Ryder's herd had grown to nearly 50 head, and he hired a young man named Thomas to help with the work. Thomas was 18, eager to learn, and he quickly proved himself valuable. He built himself a small cabin on the far edge of Ryder's property and settled in as if he had always been there. Flora took to mothering Thomas almost immediately, feeding him enormous meals and mending his clothes and scolding him when he took foolish risks. Thomas accepted it with bashful gratitude, and Ryder thought that maybe the boy had been missing a mother's touch. He certainly thrived under Flora's attention, filling out and gaining confidence. In early October, Flora began to slow down, her movements more careful, her stamina flagging. She spent more time sitting than standing, her hands always busy with knitting or sewing as she prepared for the baby's arrival. Ryder had built a cradle from oak, sanded smooth and rubbed with oil until it glowed. Flora had made blankets and tiny gowns, and they had set up a corner of the cabin as a nursery, a space that waited for its new occupant. The baby came on a cold night in early November, almost exactly a year since Ryder and Flora had married. Flora had been restless all day, pacing the cabin, unable to get comfortable. At supper, she gasped and pressed her hand to her belly. "What is it?" Ryder asked, half rising from his chair. "I think it is time," Flora said, her voice tight. "The baby is coming." Ryder sent Thomas racing into Wallace to fetch the doctor and the midwife, though he suspected the baby would come before they could arrive. He was right. Flora's labor was hard and fast, and Ryder found himself playing midwife, following half-remembered instructions his mother had once given him, praying he would not fail his wife in this most critical moment. Flora was incredible. She bore the pain with gritted teeth and fierce determination, her hand crushing Ryder's as she pushed. And then, just as the first gray light of dawn touched the horizon, the baby came into the world with a lusty cry. "It is a boy," Ryder said, his voice breaking. "Flora, we have a son." He placed the baby on Flora's chest, and she cradled him with shaking hands, tears streaming down her face. "He is perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." The doctor and midwife arrived an hour later to find mother and baby both healthy, Ryder hovering over them like a protective bear. The midwife checked Flora over, pronounced everything as it should be, and left them with instructions and promises to return in a few days. The doctor examined the baby, a tiny thing with a shock of dark hair and green eyes like his mother, and declared him strong and well-formed. They named him Robert, after Ryder's father. Robert Finch, born November 5, 1879, a child who would never know the hardship and fear that had marked the beginning of his parents' love story, only the warmth and security that had come from it. The first months of Robert's life were exhausting and wonderful. He was a good baby, sleeping for reasonable stretches and nursing well, but he still demanded constant attention. Flora was a natural mother, patient and loving, and Ryder found himself marveling at how easily she had slipped into the role. He, on the other hand, was terrified he would break the tiny person they had created. But Flora laughed at his fears and taught him how to hold Robert, how to change his nappies, how to soothe him when he cried. Winter settled in again, but the cabin felt warmer than ever with the three of them inside. Ryder would sit by the fire in the evenings, Robert asleep in his arms, watching Flora as she knitted or read, and think that he could not ask for anything more. This was happiness, real and complete. Spring came, and with it Robert's first smile, his first laugh, the beginnings of his personality emerging. He was a cheerful child, curious about everything, and Ryder spent hours showing him the ranch, pointing out the cattle, the horses, the chickens that still adored Flora. Robert was too young to understand, but Ryder talked to him anyway, telling him about the land, about the work, about the legacy he was building for his son. In the summer of 1880, Flora discovered she was pregnant again. Robert was not quite a year old, and she worried about how she would manage two small children, but Ryder was thrilled. He loved being a father, loved watching his family grow, and he eagerly anticipated the arrival of their second child. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Flora was often sick, and she tired easily, struggling to keep up with an increasingly mobile Robert. Ryder hired a woman from Wallace, a widow named Mrs. Henderson, to come and help a few days a week. Mrs. Henderson was brisk and efficient, and she took over much of the housework, freeing Flora to rest and recover her strength. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret, arrived in March of 1881. Her birth was easier than Robert's had been, and she was a smaller, quieter baby, content to watch the world with wide gray eyes that reminded Ryder of storm clouds. Flora doted on her, and Robert, now walking and starting to talk, was fascinated by his little sister, always wanting to touch her, to help care for her. The years passed quickly after that, measured in milestones and seasons. Robert grew tall and strong, a miniature version of his father with his mother's green eyes and quick smile. Margaret was quieter, more thoughtful, but no less loved. A third child, a boy they named Samuel, arrived in 1883, and then a fourth, another girl named Catherine, in 1885. The ranch prospered along with the family. Ryder's herd had grown to over 200 head, and he had bought more land, expanding his property until it stretched for miles. He built a bigger house, a real farmhouse with separate bedrooms for the children and a wide porch that faced the mountains. Flora filled it with warmth and laughter, and it became known throughout the county as a place of hospitality and kindness. The children grew up surrounded by love and the wild beauty of Idaho. Robert learned to ride almost before he could walk, and by the time he was 10, he was helping his father with the cattle. Margaret had her mother's way with animals and spent hours in the chicken coop or with the milk cows, singing to them in a sweet, clear voice. Samuel was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes, always pushing boundaries, and Catherine was the baby, spoiled by everyone and utterly fearless. Ryder and Flora's love deepened with every passing year. They still stole moments together when the children were occupied, still kissed in the kitchen when they thought no one was looking, still lay awake at night talking about their dreams and plans. They had built something extraordinary together, not just a ranch but a life, a legacy, a family that would endure long after they were gone. In 1890, when Robert was 11, he asked his father about the story of how his parents had met. They were working together on a fence line, and the question came out of nowhere, the way children's questions often did. "How did you and Ma fall in love?" Robert asked, his young face serious. Ryder sat back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. "That is a long story, son." "I want to hear it." So Ryder told him about finding Flora collapsed by the water trough, about nursing her back to health, about falling in love during those long weeks of recovery. He told him about the stagecoach attack, about the trial, about the proposal and the wedding. He told him everything, holding nothing back, and Robert listened with rapt attention. "She almost died," Robert said when the story was finished. "If she had not made it to our ranch, she would have died." "Probably," Ryder agreed, "but she did make it. She fought her way here and she lived, and we got our chance to be together. And because of that, you are here. You and your sister and your brothers. All of it came from that one moment, from me finding her and deciding to help." "That is a good story," Robert said. "Romantic," Ryder laughed. "Your mother thinks so too." They finished the fence and returned to the house, where Flora had supper waiting. She looked up as they came in, her face lighting with the smile that still made Ryder's heart skip a beat, and he thought about how lucky he was. How all of this, every good thing in his life, had started with a woman collapsing at his water trough, more dead than alive, and his decision to carry her inside. The 1890s brought changes. The children grew older, more independent. Robert began talking about starting his own ranch someday, and Margaret spoke of becoming a teacher. Samuel wanted to be a lawman, and Catherine, at just 6, declared she was going to be a doctor, which made Flora laugh and Ryder burst with pride. The world was opening up for them in ways it never had for their parents' generation, and Ryder was determined to give them every opportunity. In 1895, Ryder and Flora celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, inviting neighbors from miles around. The house was packed with people, the tables groaning with food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. At one point, Ryder pulled Flora aside, leading her out onto the porch where they could have a moment of relative quiet. 20 years, he said, pulling her into his arms. Can you believe it? Some days it feels like forever, Flora said, smiling up at him. And some days it feels like we just got married yesterday. Do you have any regrets about how things turned out, I mean? Flora was quiet for a moment, her head resting on his chest. Sometimes I think about that family, she said softly. The ones who died in the attack. I wonder what their lives would have been like if they had lived, if their children would have grown up, gotten married, had families of their own. I think about them too, Ryder admitted. But Flora, you cannot live your life in the shadow of their deaths. You have honored them by living fully, by being happy, by creating this beautiful family. That is the best memorial you could give them. I know. She lifted her head to look at him. And I am happy, Ryder. Happier than I ever imagined possible. You gave me everything I never knew I wanted. A home, a family, a love that has sustained me through everything. I would not change a single moment of it. Ryder kissed her, slow and deep, and when they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. Come on, he said, taking her hand. We have a party to get back to. Our children went to a lot of trouble to celebrate us. The least we can do is show up. They returned to the house, to the noise and laughter and warmth, and danced together while their children cheered. And Ryder looked around at all of it, at the life they had built, and felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. The years continued to pass. The children grew into adults, each finding their own path. Robert did indeed start his own ranch, marrying a girl from Wallace named Sarah, and settling on land just north of Ryder's property. Margaret became a teacher, as she had dreamed, and married a young lawyer from Boise. Samuel joined the Territorial Marshal Service and gained a reputation as an honest, capable lawman. Catherine, true to her word, went to medical school back east and became one of the first female doctors in Idaho. Ryder and Flora aged together, their hair going gray, their bodies slowing down. But the love between them never dimmed. They still held hands when they walked, still kissed goodbye when one of them left the house, still talked late into the night. They watched their grandchildren come into the world, 8 of them by 1905, and delighted in spoiling them the way grandparents do. In the spring of 1908, Ryder fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious, but it settled in his chest and would not leave. The doctor said it was pneumonia, said he needed to rest, but Ryder was 73 and stubborn, and he had never been good at resting. Flora nursed him as he had once nursed her, sitting by his bedside, coaxing broth and medicine into him, refusing to leave his side. One evening, as the sun set outside their window, Ryder took Flora's hand. "I have been thinking," he said, his voice raspy. "About that day I found you by the water trough. I was mending a fence when I heard you fall. Do you remember?" "I remember," Flora said, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I remember thinking I was going to die, and then you were there, and I thought maybe I had a chance. Best decision I ever made, carrying you inside. Gave me the best 30 years of my life." He coughed, a harsh, rattling sound. "I do not regret a single day of it, Flora, not one. I do not either." Flora leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "You saved me, Ryder. In every way a person can be saved. And you saved me right back." He smiled, his eyes drifting closed. "I am tired, love." "Then rest," Flora whispered. "I will be right here when you wake up." But Ryder did not wake up. He slipped away in the night, peacefully, Flora's hand in his. She sat with him until morning, until their children came and found her there, still holding his hand, her face wet with tears but calm. They buried Ryder on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large oak tree where he could watch over the land he had built and loved. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people, neighbors and friends and family, all of them touched by Ryder's kindness and generosity over the years. Flora stood at the graveside, her children around her, and spoke about the man she had loved for 33 years. "He was my hero," she said simply. "From the moment he found me until the moment he left me. He showed me what it meant to be loved, truly loved without reservation or condition, and I am grateful for every single day we had together." Flora lived another 5 years after Ryder's death, years she spent surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, never even considered it. Ryder had been her great love, her one true partner, and she was content with the memories they had made together. She filled her days with quilting and gardening, with reading to her grandchildren and teaching them to bake bread the way she had learned as a girl. In the fall of 1913, Flora took sick. It was quick, a fever that came on suddenly and did not break. Her children gathered around her and she smiled at each of them, touched their faces, told them how proud she was. And then, on a cool October evening, she closed her eyes and did not open them again. They buried Flora beside Ryder, under that same oak tree. Robert, now 54 and gray-haired himself, stood at his mother's grave and thought about the story his father had told him all those years ago. About a woman who had collapsed at a water trough, half dead, and a cowboy who had carried her inside and stayed awake for days to keep her alive. About a love that had grown from that desperate beginning into something beautiful and enduring, something that had shaped not just their lives, but the lives of their children and grandchildren. The ranch continued to thrive under Robert's management, and eventually his own children took it over, and then their children after that. The Finch family became a fixture in Idaho, known for their integrity and hard work, and the story of Ryder and Flora became something of a legend, passed down through the generations. In the house that Ryder had built, now expanded and modernized but still recognizable, there hung a portrait of a young couple. Ryder stood tall and serious in his wedding clothes, Flora beside him in her blue dress, both of them looking at the camera with expressions of hope and determination. Visitors would sometimes ask about them, and whoever was home would tell the story. How she had collapsed at his water trough half dead, how he had carried her inside and not slept for days, how they had fallen in love and built a life together against all odds. It was a story worth telling, a story of survival and second chances, of kindness repaid with devotion, of a love that had endured hardship and flourished in the wild beauty of the Idaho frontier. It was the story of Ryder Finch and Flora Turner, who had found each other in the most desperate of circumstances and had chosen, every single day, to build something beautiful together. And in that story, there was hope. Hope that even when things seem darkest, even when death feels close, there might be someone waiting to carry you inside. Someone who will sit beside you through the long nights, someone who will fight for you when you are too weak to fight for yourself. Someone who will love you fully and completely for all the days of your life. That was the legacy Ryder and Flora left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a testament to the transforming power of love, to the way two people can save each other and build a world together. And that legacy lived on, in the land they had tended, in the children they had raised, in the story that was told and retold until it became a part of the family's identity, a reminder of where they had come from and what they could overcome. The oak tree on the hill grew tall and strong, its branches spreading wide, offering shade to the two graves beneath it. And if you stood there on a summer evening when the sun was setting and the valley was bathed in golden light, you could almost imagine you heard voices on the wind. Laughter and conversation, the sound of a family gathered together, of love that had outlasted death itself. Because that was the truth of it, the heart of the story. Love like Ryder and Flora's did not end. It echoed forward, through time and generations, a ripple spreading outward from that one moment when a cowboy had looked down at a dying woman and decided to help. That decision had changed everything. It had created a family, a legacy, a love story that would be remembered long after the last person who knew them was gone. And somewhere, in whatever place waits beyond this life, maybe Ryder and Flora were together still, his hand in hers, her head on his shoulder, both of them at peace. They had earned that peace, earned it through years of hard work and devotion, through the daily choice to love each other even when it was difficult, even when life threw challenges at them. They had built something that lasted, something real and true and beautiful. That was the gift they gave to those who came after them. The knowledge that such love was possible, that even in the harsh reality of frontier life, even when surrounded by danger and hardship, two people could find each other and create something extraordinary. It was a gift worth cherishing, worth protecting, worth passing down to each new generation. And so the story lived on, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed too dark, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes in the form of a stranger who becomes a lover, a friend who becomes a spouse, a desperate moment that becomes the beginning of forever. Ryder and Flora's love had started with her collapse at his water trough, with him carrying her inside, with days spent fighting to keep her alive. But it had grown into something so much more, something that could not be contained by time or even by death itself. It was a love for the ages, and it belonged not just to them, but to everyone who heard their story and believed, even for a moment, that such love might be possible for them too. That was the true legacy of Ryder Finch and Flora Turner. Not just the family they created or the land they tended, but the hope they inspired, the proof they offered that even in the wildest, harshest circumstances, love could not only survive but flourish. And that hope, that proof, that love, would endure forever, as permanent as the mountains that stood watch over the valley, as constant as the stars that wheeled overhead in the vast Idaho sky. It was a love story written in the very land itself, in every fence post Ryder had set, every garden Flora had tended, every child they had raised together. It was there in the stone markers on the hill, in the oak tree that sheltered them, in the house that still stood strong and proud after more than a century. Their story was done, but its echoes would never fade. And that was exactly as it should be, because some love stories are too powerful, too true, too beautiful to ever really end. They just transform, becoming something larger than the two people who lived them, becoming inspiration and instruction and hope for everyone who comes after. Ryder and Flora had lived their story fully, had cherished every moment of the life they built together. They had loved deeply and completely, had raised their children with wisdom and kindness, had left the world better than they found it. What more could anyone ask for? What greater legacy could anyone hope to leave? Their story was complete, and it was perfect.